Hello there, welcome to Losing Faith, Finding Spirit. Today's episode is going to be talking about emotional abuse and why it is so hard to identify and acknowledge when you are a victim of emotional abuse. One of the biggest reasons that it is so hard to identify and acknowledge emotional abuse when you are a victim is because the victims themselves often believe that it's somehow their fault. They believe that maybe it's a misunderstanding that's being taken way out of control. Maybe it's, their responsibility for the emotional well-being of their partner or the person who's with them. It doesn't really matter why, but the point is that victims often feel responsible and to blame for the abusive behaviors. Not all emotional abuse leads to physical abuse or violence. However, almost all physical abuse stems out of an emotional abusive situation. And a victim of physical or emotional abuse will have those same things happen to them. They will feel and have that sense of self eroded. They will feel that it is their fault somehow. And that's what keeps them stuck. Either the fear of things getting worse or the hope of things changing. And sometimes that hope stems from a belief that maybe if you, the victim, behave in different patterns or do it just different this time, the abuser will react differently. Maybe this time he won't yell at me because I'm not going to bring that up again, or I'm not going to say these words in this way. I'm going to say it the way he told me to. And I'm telling you, as a person who's a survivor of emotional abuse, it doesn't matter what you do, they're going to find a way to spin it around and use it against you. Because most of the time, abusers are using you, the victim, to self-regulate. They're using you to fill in some kind of void in their own life, to fill in some kind of emotional need, so that if they can make you behave and act a certain way, they feel powerful, they feel in control, and it somehow makes them just feel better on their end. As a victim, that doesn't do us any good, but it's important to know that there is nothing in this world that you could do or say differently that will make it change. You cannot change a person. That change has to come from within. I used to believe very naively that if one person in the family could change, the whole family could be fixed. If one of us got better, all of us will get better. If one of us heals, all of us heal. One person, that's not how it works. That's not how it works in your physical body. It's not how it works in relationships. The other thing that makes it hard on emotional people who are victims of emotional abuse is if you come from a history of childhood abuse or childhood trauma. If you have any kind of issues with your parents, whether that's neglect or whether that's them fighting with each other in front of you, like violently and aggressively fighting and arguing in front of you, whatever that encompasses, it creates that rocky foundation that makes you think that maybe it's okay. If your parents are together, even though they yell and fight and they're emotionally abusive to each other, and that's the role model that you've seen is this unhealthy, toxic relationship, you're going to take that into your future relationships because on your subconscious level, you've already determined that that's what love looks like. That's what a marriage, that's what a mother and father, those are your role models for what that role is supposed to be. It's not a good one, but it sets you up for repeating those same patterns within yourself. And if you are like me and you were placed in a position of being the emotional, referee and the emotional support of your family, like I was the little therapist to my mom, you're going to end up being that way again. You're going to feel that way again in your adult relationships if you don't work on those those wounds, those parent wounds, if you don't work on healing what real love is, if you don't work on identifying those patterns that you grew up in, you're going to repeat them. I say that like it's going to happen, but the chances and the psychology, the results are there, and it's very high that you will, maybe you're a very lucky one. You're going to be listening to this channel if you were a lucky one. And you walked away and you managed to find somebody who is actually great. Because great people do exist. I mean, you're listening to this channel, and I think you're probably pretty great. If you're listening to this and trying to make yourself a better person, work through your issues, you're already a step ahead on the right path. So if in childhood you were made to feel like you were responsible for the other people's emotional well-being, there's a very, very strong chance you're going to feel that way into your adulthood, into your adult relationships. And if you suffered any kind of trauma with your parents, where you felt like you had to rationalize their behavior, this is a real big one. If for some reason your parents' behavior, maybe they were like violent, maybe they broke things around you, maybe they cussed each other out. In my family, there was a lot of yelling, an absolute lot of just yelling at each other, yelling obscenities, yelling anything, insults. Both of my parents would just yell at each other. And I thought to myself, I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to have a relationship where we just descend into yelling. But within the first year of my dating with my ex-husband, we yelled all the time. I mean, I remember losing my mind in a car, like just yelling and banging on the seat. And I don't even know. Now I know it's retroactive abuse, but at the time I felt completely out of control. And that's what retroactive abuse does. And let me touch on that for just a second here. Retroactive abuse is this it's very frustrating when you've lived through it, but also enlightening. So I hope this can enlighten you. Retroactive abuse is when the abuser will keep pushing your buttons and saying things or like doing things that they know upset you. And it's all to make you react. And so what it is usually it's talked about with narcissists and to other toxic type personalities. They push your buttons. They tell you or argue at you. They say whatever they can. And they do this until you snap back. And whether that's yelling back, in my case, whether that's just saying something completely vile yourself, whatever that is, you react to the person, like just, and now suddenly they're calm. Suddenly the abuser is so in control. Suddenly the abuser is like, oh, that's so immature of you. We can't even just talk. Never mind the fact that they've been like yelling at you or saying things that don't make sense at you and wouldn't give you a break for an hour. Finally, you've had enough and you snap. So, and the point in what this does for the person, the abuser or the narcissist, is it makes them feel empowered. It makes them feel better because you have just helped them self-regulate their own anger. They throw their tantrums and rage because they can't control themselves. So if you can stoop down to their level and you start acting out, whether it's yelling or cuss, whatever your situation is, they feel like they've gotten the upper hand because now you're out of control. Now you've descended. And now if you are like me and you suffer some complex trauma and the emotional weight of that and the trauma bonding, all of that stuff that's going into it, you feel like you're to blame. Forget the hour of being pushed into a corner. Sometimes literally, I literally would be pushed. Like I would literally try to walk away and say, I'm done with this conversation. It's too much for me right now. And the other person would literally follow me from room to room, would not give me a break, would not allow it. And that was something that they would use. Those are the words that would be used, is that you're not allowed to stop. My ex, when we first started, And we have these kinds of arguments that weren't quite descended into that, weren't quite as strong as they got later. Um, he would say things like, "I'm not letting you leave this house until we settle this argument. I'm not letting you sleep until we settle this argument. I'm not letting you do XYZ until we settle this argument. No, you're not. You're going to stand here and listen to me until I finish this argument." And at first, it seemed like, he cares. That was the frame he kind of started at. "I care too much. We need to solve this. This is important. This is more important than work. You're more important than work. This argument, this whatever, is more important than work because you're more important." And at first, that sounds romantic. At first, I thought, wow, this person, he genuinely loves me. Like, he won't let me go. He wants to finish this. He wants to talk things through. And as somebody who, in my childhood, emotions were not allowed to be expressed, there was only enough room in our family for my parents' emotions. There wasn't room for my siblings and I. And what I mean by this is that my parents' struggles, their fighting, their conflict, my father's alcoholism, my mother's codependency and enmeshment, all of that was so big that if you had any feelings or any opinions or any thoughts, you was no place for you. There was no place for me. I didn't have a place to express my feelings. I didn't have a place to work through my emotions. There was no safety in that household. There was no stability. So meeting my ex, who was like, "No, you're more important than all of this. We are going to talk this through. Your emotions, I need to hear what you think." It was very seductive because I had never had that before. I had never had an experience where somebody was putting me first. And that's what it felt like. Now, having lived almost 20 years of that cycle, that back and forth, that constant, "you're not leaving until I'm done with you" mentality, I realized that that's where it's coming from. It was never about me. My emotions were never important enough. In fact, it would go and go, and now I see it now. This was the cycle of retroactive abuse. He would follow me around or keep me from doing things until I snapped back, until I yelled back, until I screamed, until I lost it, until I broke down. Or he'd keep me up late at night until I was just too exhausted, and I just say whatever to get him to go away. And that's the abuse. That's the manipulation. You're worn down. You're worn out. I would be so worn down before I go to work that you can't perform your job properly. I'd be late to work. He'd be late to work. And then the stress of driving late to work, or the stress of, will I lose my job? Will he lose his job? Like, those kinds of stresses were constant. And him knowing that, I think he kind of, whether fully consciously or on a subconscious level, did it. I will never know, and I can't speak for him. But the manipulation was real, and the cycle was real. That was his favorite manipulative tool, was the retroactive abuse, the wear you down until you react, and then suddenly he was like in control. Like, literally, it was like he would turn into a different person after I broke down. So oftentimes at the early stages, I would forget and kind of overlook everything he did up until the point that I broke down, and I would only focus on the fact that I broke down. That's the only thing that I could control. That's the thing that was my responsibility. So it didn't matter what was said up until that point. If and when I ever broke down or cried or screamed or whatever, I would bear that. I would feel like the whole thing was my fault. And that's trauma bonding too. Trauma bonding is where you are being abused and you feel connected to that person that's abusing you. I mean, and it's a cycle of trauma bonding. There's like different things that happen that make you feel bonded to this person. And it's kind of the idea, like, they do something that, they woo you, they romance you, and You feel trusted, and then they break that trust and they abuse you, and then they make you feel better again, and that on repeat. And that's exactly what would happen, is in that retroactive abuse, if I reacted and then I'd start being upset at myself, and then I'd start feeling like crap, and I'd start apologizing, and I'd start, it's all my fault, he would comfort me and hold me, and everything's good, and then I'd feel better. So now I'm bonded. He caused the trauma that caused it to get to that point of me breaking down, and then he's the one that picks me back up and puts you together and makes you feel better. And then you become emotionally reliant on that person. And it creates a chemical reaction in your brain that is almost like being on a drug that you get used to. And you kind of like, you feel that cycle in your body. Because feeling comforted makes you feel good. Being comforted makes you feel good. The problem is that it should have never got to that point. There was no need. Most of the time, I can't even remember the arguments, because another symptom and unfortunately another side effect of trauma is bad memories. I have very good memories. I have very keen ways of remembering things. But when it comes to those cycles of trauma, like even my parents, I can't tell you what my parents argued about all the time. I tuned them out. It got to that point in my marriage. I can't tell you all the little things that we argued about, because sometimes it was like nothing, like popcorn. And I kind of, and again, because I grew up with with the traumatic childhood, and my parents were the center of my trauma. And while I may not say, straight up they were abusive, the abusive patterns were set. They were abusive to each other, and witnessing that causes trauma. Witnessing somebody else being abused in front of you causes trauma to you when you're a child. That was the pattern I was used to. I was a passive, I don't like conflict, low conflict person, because I didn't want to live that life that my parents lived, fighting all the time. But that was exactly the life I was living. That's exactly, and until I had a child and a third person in the house, did I realize it was happening, because I would be gaslighted. Gaslighting is another manipulation tool. It's where the person bends the reality until you feel like maybe you didn't see what you saw. Maybe you didn't hear what you heard. And then your reality gets distorted, because that person is so confident and so assured that their words are right, and they tell you that you don't know what you're talking about. So there would be times where I would say something and he'd say, "You didn't say that." And I'm like, I heard and felt the words coming out of my body. I know what I said. And that would go on so often that I just sort of thought, this guy's got ADHD, this guy's got some problem, he can't remember, he's got a hearing loss issue, something's going on with him. He thinks that it's just, and it would be like, it's a simple misunderstanding, why are you freaking out? I wouldn't say those words, oh my gosh, if you say those words to somebody you are going to get it. Whew. But internally, I kept thinking, what is wrong? Like, something's wrong. And then that's the justifying, trying to look for the reasons. Why does he behave this way? This doesn't make sense. Nobody else treats me like this. When I have a conversation with other people, they know exactly what I said. And if they didn't, they ask. And if I tell them what I said, they accept that as the facts. Like, why is this so complicated? Why is it so complicated? It's because it's abuse. It's a tool of abuse. And having a child, I saw my ex do the same things to our child. I saw him gaslight our child, and I was like, oh my God, no. But the signs were there the whole time. I just was trapped in my own self-blame and in feeling like I had to fix it, and it was my responsibility to fix it. It's not your responsibility to fix somebody else. You can't fix somebody else. You can't do it. It's not okay. Yelling is not okay. You don't need to just send into yelling matches. You don't have to do that. It's not okay. Like I explained with the retroactive abuse and that kind of stuff. Like, it's one thing to be like, hey, this is too much for me, I need to calm down. A respectable person would be like, oh yeah, totally, take your time. I'm right here. The conversation will continue. You can take a break. You can pause. You can time out. You don't have to keep going. I'm saying this more for me than anyone else because that was like I said, that was the number one abusive tactic that my ex used, and it wore me down to the point where even in the divorce, I just agreed to things to get him to go away. Just whatever, just leave, just go away. I just need you to go. I don't want that for you. I want you to have your confidence. I want you to step up. I don't want you to give away your power. I don't want you to give away your rights. I want you to stand up for yourself. But at the same time, I just want you to go. I just want you to survive. And I know. In the end of the day, some of that stuff you'll make up. If it's money, find a way to make money again. It might not be easy, but I'll tell you, it's easier than having that nonsense dealing with the abuse. Guarantee that. Guarantee it. All right. Thank you for listening. Hope this helps. Bye.